just want to thank you guys for coming, and I think I've done an okay job introducing our teachers, but we can go around the circle and have you say words. And then I'd like Ruth to talk a little bit on a slide or two about the benefits of Suzuki, and then specifically what we go through in book one, because that's where most of us are going to be starting, and then take some questions. So here are awesome rock shots of the three of us, Ruth, Susan, and myself. And so the backstory from what I took when I went to Suzuki training in Hartford, Connecticut at the Hart School was in post-war Japan. Dr. Shinichi Suzuki was his father had a violin factory, and it was bombed and destroyed, and I think it was repurposed. A lot of the woodworking industries were repurposed to make aircraft parts or coffins or whatever. And after the war, he stuck with violin. I'm not sure he made any, but he went around teaching violin. And what fascinated him was that the different dialects of the Japanese language were so fascinating and different, and yet 2-year-olds were fluent, without thinking. And so he thought, well, if they can learn that just by speaking and listening, well, you can certainly learn the violin in the same method. So it was, I think, the tradition of learning how to play it orally and from what you hear, rather than getting bogged down in reading music and all the music theory that you're confronted with, was his method. They call it the mother tongue approach. You don't learn how to speak by reading books, do you? So that's the simplest way I can put it. So Ruth, would you like to jump in and share a few thoughts? She helped us put this deck together.
Sorry. Anyway. Yeah, sure. So there's so many other points in the Suzuki method, but I'm just going to go with, like, in a nutshell, these are, I think, some of the most important things. So we always start with the mindset that every child can learn just the same way as everyone learns their language, right? Wherever, even if, like John said, Japanese, they learn, a Japanese growing in Japan, or anyone actually growing in Japan, learn their language really, flawlessly. Like, they can speak their language without any hardships learning them. But the same person, if they grow up in, let's say, here in the US, they will learn to speak in English very easily. Meaning every child learns in different pacing, yes, but everyone can. So before, there's this notion that, oh, this kid is talented, this kid is not talented, or this person has an ear, this person doesn't have an ear. But what at least Dr. Suzuki and what a lot of scientists have learned, that it's mostly the nature versus the nurture part. The nature, it only plays a role in their pace and how quick or how quick they adapt to whatever they're learning or whatever their environment is. But it's really mostly on how we nurture it. And moving forward, cultivating environment, I'm kind of like tapping on that already, is one of the main biggest factors. Again, going back to the learning the language, it's really, if your family speaks another language, that's what we learn, right? We grow, whatever we hear growing up, that's what we learn, saying or speaking out ourselves. So some of the things that can play in the environment is the parents or anyone who can practice with them throughout the week. So unfortunately, in the lessons usually just happens once a week. So the teachers doesn't really give the environment, but the parents um, do provide the environment with that. So we usually have the parent involvement, which is coming up next in the lessons. Then they're free to take down notes or even follow up with the teacher. I usually have myself like available if throughout the week there's a question, just so to make sure that that environment is really conducive to learning and hopefully without wrong habits. Other things that can contribute to the environment is bringing them to concerts, and exposing them to what a good sound is, what is actually a good playing, and not just they learn the instrument, but they don't just learn how to play whatever song they're playing. What we have in mind is for them to play beautifully, with and comfortably and with their own ownership and all that. So yeah, so first one, every child can learn. That's the mindset. Next one, they can learn because of the environment that we provide them. And the third one is it's mostly the parents that does provide that environment. So the teacher, the parent, and the student has to, we call that the Suzuki triangle. But that this whole experience, especially for the kid, works out really well if all the components of that triangle works really well together. So having that transparency between the parent and the teacher, is always good. So if there are hardships or any difficulties or challenges at home, please feel free to tell the teacher. And if there's other different ways, like a teacher doesn't really communicate well, then the parent could tell the teacher, and so on. So as long as the child is the priority in that triangle, I think that will really make it the experience as beneficial as possible.
Okay.
That's done with a slide.
No, that's great. Does anybody have any questions on that? We don't have that many slides, so it doesn't hurt to talk about each one a little bit. In these days of Zoom lessons, when I went to Suzuki training camp, there was the parent, there was the child, there was the teacher, the parent was taking notes, the child had memorized this and that and was all caught up. I mean, in it with both feet, really. And that's how it has to go. And it's not that easy with Zoom lessons and both parents working, so, some of the things I've done, it's a clever thing you can do with Zoom is, when it's time, if the parent can't be there, I make sure to, sum up the homework for the next lesson by clicking the record button and getting, a 20-second video of this is what you need to work on and emailing it to the parent, following up, because they want to and they might be busy and we should do everything we can to help them out. So
just to clarify, is the parent also playing, like basically taking a lesson at the same time as the child? We're both taking that lesson and then we're going home and in the interim we're practicing together? Or is the
I don't think the parent has an instrument in their hands.
Okay.
I don't know, other teachers can tell me if they've ever.
Yeah. Yes. So for me, I know some districts require that the parents to take the lessons first, but at least for me, I have the parents at least learn the basics. Like they know how to hold a bow, they know how to hold a violin. They can pretty much play the first few songs of the book. And usually they learn how to do it even just by observing. And in-person lessons, there are a few minutes I spend with actually teaching the parent and them doing it, so they know how it feels. Because it's sometimes a lot easier to say it, but it's different when you feel it. And there comes the struggle between the student and the parent at home, and we don't want that. But I don't know, maybe Susan has something to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, adults often make the mistake that they think understanding is doing. Understanding is different from actually being able to do to like perform a skill, and number one, it's great for, like you're saying, Ruth, with the parent just being able to get basic skills on the instrument, and certainly, in person is so much easier to accomplish this than Zoom. It kind of throws off the triangle a little bit, although we can still work with it. Um, Sometimes the parent will become so just enthralled and in love with sort of learning an instrument, because we're breaking it down into tiny steps, that they often go so much farther than they ever thought that they would. Now that of course doesn't always happen, but it's certainly a phenomenon. And even beyond that, there have been some Suzuki parents who then go on to become certified. I mean, this is of course, it would take a bunch of years to do this, but where they're not initially like a violinist or a musician in any way, but that somehow this method is like producing that kind of phenomenon, which is very interesting.
Well, it's very hands-on, using your ears. It's not a bunch of paperwork that you're going to get to later because you should. You're right, and you're doing it right then and there, and you're creating some sounds. So it's very enjoyable.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So wouldn't that, I'm kind of picturing, wouldn't, like, because let's say Gabriel and I are going to take it together. We have two guitars. Let's say we came in person. Should I just bring my guitar? And
sure.
would it be easier that way to, like, because you're talking about doing versus explaining, right? And I guess my other question was, should I get some skills? How long can we just start up, or would I need to take like a few classes before we start up so I have some base level skills? Or do you think I could learn enough just from, on the fly?
So you've never played the guitar?
I took a couple classes over, spread out, never stuck with it. So I know a little bit, but
It's fine. I mean, you can be the 4-year-old who's never held a guitar, and it works because when I took the training, I was scratching my head. Do you need to do this to play guitar? The answer is no, but the approach works. And whereas you can pick up a guitar because it's a fretted instrument, if it's in tune, put your fingers, squeeze and strum, and you're going to get a nice sound. There's kind of a low barrier to entry. But I've also observed people who really know how to play the classical guitar get about 3 times as much volume, a wonderful tone, and can play the most amazing things, even if they're very simple. And it's just, anyone who's been in the room with someone doing something correctly, it blew me away. And this gets you on that path. What I observed at the camp was there's the initial technique you have to learn, which for Suzuki, it's classical guitar using folk music. You're using your 2 fingers and eventually your thumb to play melodies. You're not strumming with a pick, and you're using a classical guitar, and you have to grow your nails a little bit. And what you're really learning is how to learn, because you go slowly, you start simply, but you're memorizing it as you do it and physically doing it. And you don't get any further than what you really know. So when you've got it, you've really got it. And it's kind of performance ready, which instead of, downloading 30 rock songs with Tab for some imaginary gig someday, and now you've got to go learn it. It's more linear than that. So you could start anywhere. You could be an expert and have to unlearn a bunch of stuff to get back on board. So I think it's useful. I mean, what do you think, Gabby? You've been teaching violin for a long time.
Actually, I had a question because I was raised on Suzuki method for like a hot minute.
A hot
But
minute. What's that, half of the first song?
well, like book 1, but I already knew piano.
Right.
So there's a question of, because as you get more advanced, right? Like let's say Suzuki book like 4 and 5, eventually they need to learn how to like sight read. How do you go about teaching that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I didn't grow up doing Suzuki method, but when after college, I did teach Suzuki method, and I did stumble upon like, okay, these kids are now in book 4 and book 5, now it's way harder for them to teach learning how to read notes. So what I do now is, even at the very beginning, and a lot of teachers do this too, at the very beginning of learning the instrument, maybe like the third, fourth, depends, lesson, but once you get them set up, I do introduce reading notes. They don't learn their songs out of reading, because I want to keep their focus on their good tone and their good setup at the beginning. But I do introduce the open strings. I start with the A, so I want them to be very familiar with A, and then go with E, and then I go, when they're good with A and E, they go with D and G, and then once they know that, I start adding, like, okay, so if it's A and it's E, then that's easier to fill up the space between A, B, C, D, and they don't only identify them, they know how to play them. So if it's between A to E, I know that has to be in the A string. And then eventually, somewhere in the middle of book one or towards the end of book one, I do add, I can read the music. Actually, I have it right here. So I do use this. And then sometime in book two, I add like rhythm a day. So they don't just understand identifying notes, but they're quick in identifying the rhythms too. So their playing is a little ahead of the reading. And then when they're in pretty good shape, we kind of like raise up the bar of the reading, and then we kind of like bring them together. So the reading doesn't become a problem when they get to book 4, 5, 10, like the reading is great. And usually they enjoy reading because they've always played, right? And then they read, they feel good about reading. Yeah.
I've always thought written music is the way they recorded something that some genius made up. It wasn't directions on how to play. It was just, this is what they did. Here's how I'm going to communicate with you. And so with the guitar students, if they've already been playing, they don't mind looking at some sheet music, and I'll say, these notes you've been playing, C, D, E, F, G, here they are. And they're like, okay. And then they play what they're already familiar with while they connect it, and they learn what it is. And David, one of the things that often happens with some of my students over the last couple of years, who they didn't stick with Suzuki very long, but what you learn applies if you get out Beatles easy guitar, for example, and as long as you're in a key that doesn't have a load of accidentals, if you're in the key of C or G or F, you can play the melody with your fingers and then play the bass notes with your thumb that are suggested by the chord chart. So it's a great introduction to get you off the mark. So let's go back to the presentation. Hang on one second.
I have to go. I have a lesson. So
You do. You have June.
yep. Bye.
All right. Bye, Abby. We'll see you Friday.
Hi, nice to meet
See you
you.
Friday. Nice to meet you too.
Abigail. Okay. Okay, so let me see. Yeah, here we are. So, Ruth, did you want to jump back on this one? Encouragement, listening, repetition.
Yeah,
I think we have
yes.
kind of talked
Go
about
ahead.
them, but go ahead.
The listening is really important, though. I think that's something like we can talk about listening all night, but it goes along with the environment thing, that we listen to the recording. I can't stress this enough. So for those families, for those students who actually listen to the recording, so I don't know if so we have a recording that comes along with the book, and I encourage the parents, I asked to have the parents listen, to download the recording and listen to the recording as often as they can, because eventually they're learning all of those songs become so naturally to them. Like once they get there, okay, this goes up, their violin, they know how the violin works, and the guitar as well. Then, and if they hear, okay, this pitch goes up, they know how to look for it. And so they do play by ear at the beginning. And again, going back to the reading, once they read, the idea is when they read the notes, it's already saying in their head whatever they see in the music sheet. And the repetition is super important as well. So Dr. Suzuki used to say like 10 knowledge, like I think Susan kind of touched on this earlier, 10 times knowledge equals a skill. So if they can do it once or twice, that doesn't really guarantee them that they can do it over and over. So we want to have a higher probability, higher chance of being able to get a certain skill. So even in the lesson, I do that. Okay, let's do that 5 times or even 10 times and so on. Delayed reading, we did talk about that. And then the review is super important for me because that's where we work on our technique. So review here means reviewing repertoire that the student has already played or the student has already studied. So in traditional method, we play song number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. But in Suzuki, we go song number 1, number 2, then 1 and 2, then song number 3, then 1, 2, and 3. We kind of layer on on the skills that we acquire. And those students who don't really do the review, it usually takes slower for them to move on. But those who really do the review and the listening, it's a lot easier, a lot smoother, a lot more fun. Progressing to the next pieces or to the next skills.
Cool. When I went to the camp, a lot of these kids were performing and they were in, I don't know, book 7, and they're just playing really complicated stuff. And I was just thinking, well, that for them, that's just the next song, and they've been at it that long, and kind of the whole concept of how do they do that? Well, now they're doing it, but the years before they could do it, the roots were growing. Is that your impression, Susan and Ruth, with how this really helps long term?
Yeah, absolutely. And even, Ruth is talking about the building blocks where, this method is very smart, especially the way Suzuki faculty have been able to communicate fine points and even more building blocks than, let's say, even Dr. Suzuki may have conceived of as he was putting this repertoire together. The Twinkle variation of Mississippi Hot Dog is actually preparing the student to play the Bach double in book 4. Because that same rhythm will appear in book 4 in that book. All right. And the students are often very excited to sort of learn that and to say, oh, wow, yeah, that was the first rhythm that I learned to play on the violin. And here it is. Da, 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 da. That's Mississippi Hot Dog. So also, even with a piece like Perpetual Motion, which is just running eighth notes, I love to use that one for review because let's say later on I want to teach a student spiccato. It's running eighth notes that they already have programmed into their hands, and so then it's very easy to overlay a new bowing technique onto it, or ricochet, or staccato, anything like that. What you find is that if you've taught book 1 really well, that even beyond that, it's you can always go back to those pieces and teach new techniques on old pieces. I've found to be incredibly useful. And even when I get a student that maybe I get a student at book 3, I know that they've studied Perpetual Motion and lots of other pieces that are going to just sort of be the springboards for those more advanced techniques.
Okay, cool. I was going to say something, I forgot. Let's see. So this is violin specific, but certainly the first squeaky notes that you might do when you pick up a violin for the first time, that's kind of job 1, isn't it? To get a beautiful sound. I think Ruth, I observed one of your lessons, the first lesson, and didn't even use the violin in the first lesson. I forget who it was with, but towards the end, you started talking about bow hold, right? After a lot of call and response. I think that's one good thing to bring up is if someone can't go like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and they're not going to be able to do that on their instrument, right? So to back it up to things like keeping the beat or doing a rhythm that the teacher calls out, I think that's pretty big. Would you agree, Ruth?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay, and then posture, articulation, rhythm accuracy, left and right hand coordination, scales, and as I mentioned earlier, common repertoire, which has helped with my current student, Eloise Hagler. So that's all we have. Does anyone have any questions? Mom, do you have any questions? I think you're
she's
on.
I'm really pleased to be here and just to get to meet the faculty, and I'm learning a lot. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Let's see, David, are you still there? Did you?
I am here. Sorry if you saw me motioning, but my daughter came in. I did let her know. I couldn't turn on the TV and talk to her. So I don't have any questions at the moment. I think you've covered a lot about like how you approach it, depending, regardless of which instrument it is. So I mean, it sounds like a great approach to me. It sounds like in person would be much better if we're able to do that. And I think I understand that I would be coming without an instrument, right? And my child would come with the instrument. I'd be there to participate in the lesson, observe and get a feel for things and take notes. And then we practice at home during the week and come back a week later. Is that correct?
Well, you could bring an instrument if you like. I mean, if you're on board and you want to learn too, I'm not going to be like, no way, man.
Yeah.
And as info, we are doing limited in-person lessons at the school in our big room. We used to have 5 lessons at a time. Now we have 2 teachers who can come in for the guitar only. At the moment, Ruth is not teaching in person; it's Zoom only.
Okay.
And Susan, I think you're open to coming in if we can just justify the commute with a big block of lessons. So we just hired.
How's the Zoom working out?
The Zoom is great when you're at the point, and you guys can jump in, information exchange and listening and observing and commenting. I just had my student, we had to work on things like how to sit, put your foot on the footstool, how to hold the guitar so you get the correct angle between your fingers and string. And that was not doable. She was on her dad's swivel chair in his office. The dog was running around. So they came over on Saturday and we had a lesson on my back deck outside and ironed out a lot of stuff. And so we could, and I think in the tradition of Suzuki, if you have a bunch of students meeting once a week, you would have a group lesson once a month maybe to bolster it. We could do Zoom lessons, but meet once a month in person to work on, whatever might not be being solved.
I should say though, Zoom lessons, I was like very skeptical about this March, obviously, but we're like all thrown into like this whole new setup. But there are definitely cons to it, but there are also pros that I've noticed, and I am really pleased with how the progress, how I see some progress happening with students. It's different. Like there are good things to it. Like for example, if I want to have a closer up look to my bow hold, so I just like have to do this. Whereas in person, you're like, oh, like look right here, like it's. Whereas in Zoom, I can have a like really close up on what I really want to show or my fingers, and like this fall, obviously I don't want to teach them this like this forever, but I should say that it's doable, it's workable, and it's I have a couple of new students even just this September who are totally beginners, and some of them have already had good setup and they're already playing the first variation of Twinkle. So it's possible. You know, you just have there's different ways, you're learning different ways to communicate, and different ways to use the technology too, but it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah, so don't shy away because we're on Zoom. Would be my input.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my kids have amazed me with their adaptability to to jumping into computer use and Zoom and everything. So
Great. Okay. Well,
I have just one question. How old is your oldest student? I mean, do you have any just adults that come and just want to learn, or are they all kids?
no, we have a lot of adult students. Our oldest.
For Suzuki or for across the board?
Oh, I think Suzuki is mostly youngsters.
Only children? Okay.
For me, Suzuki is actually just really an approach though. So it's, I mean, an adult could do Suzuki, but also do other stuff. So it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Doesn't have to be a child.
Yeah, but on how you package it would change depending on the age.
Sure.
Yeah.
With the method, they could still use the method.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and what's the sorry, what's the youngest for violin or for guitar for Suzuki method?
I think Eloise is 6 years old. My student.
I've had um, I've had like 2 kids who have started a little bit before they were 3. One is still playing violin now. He's now 5, and he's playing book 7 in Suzuki, and he plays great.
Wow.
But it's a little tougher, and we need more parental involvement.
Of course.
But I like starting with 5, around 5 years old. I think that's the most ideal. But for parents who are, and for kids who are interested, really interested, and for parents who are committed, I allow 3-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, one thing, of course, I recall from trying to play guitar a couple times is how much my fingertips hurt. I imagine you must go through that with violin to some extent as well, too. And how does that work when you're talking about a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old, or like, is there any difficulties getting through an initial period like that?
For me, interesting is for 3-year-olds, it's a little easier. Just like their hand is just so much more easier to mold. When I teach like a 12-year-old as a beginner, they usually hold the bow like this. Even 5-year-olds, when 3, I just like put their hand and then like just this, and then put all their fingers this way, and then they just get it. But as I don't know, especially when they're adult beginners, and I'm sure Susan probably knows this too. I feel like it's already set. It's like,
yeah, it's a claw. It's a claw, and it just you don't feel like you have to get the rubber hammers out just to, seriously, yeah.
So I feel like the challenge with the earlier beginners is their focus and their attention, and of course the commitment of the parents. But the challenge for older ones wouldn't be the focus. It would really be just to get molding their physique into a nice setup.
Yeah, and I think for guitar, there's, sometimes that any finger soreness goes away, especially with a classical guitar with nylon strings. It's not as painful as a steel string acoustic that you have to play loud because you're singing with others. It's just. And if there is a little bit, that can be like a mark of achievement. Oh, you've been practicing, proof that you're getting somewhere kind of thing. So.
Right. And can any acoustic guitar be strung with nylon strings? The two that we have, they have steel strings on them at the moment, but is
They could be. A steel string guitar will be much heavier in construction. So when you put the lighter nylon strings, it won't get as nice of a tone. Plus the fretboards are narrower. And then you'd also probably have to buy, which you can get, nylon strings with a ball end. So they go in with the pins.
yeah.
There's a handful of differences between a classical guitar and a steel string, and pretty much I just mentioned those: the way the strings wrap, the lighter construction, and the width of the fretboard. So if the cost of instruments is very low these days compared to the cost of good lessons, so if you're going to invest money in lessons, go out and for under $200 each, you could find some really lovely classical guitars that would sound just right.
Do you also rent guitars? Like if we didn't purchase one but wanted to take lessons, could we, or is that a possibility?
The place to go is Finley and Gage. It's across the street from the Hilton Library on Springfield Avenue in Maplewood.
Okay.
They rent guitars. We just taught a class at the Woodland, and my two students came in. They had the exact same classical guitar rental. I think it's about $15 a month for them.
Gotcha. Do you want to come back?
Sorry. Okay, so let's wrap it up. David, I'm going to follow up with you and hound you until you sign up.
Okay. Sounds good.
Or
maybe we'll sign up Maya. There she is. Say hi, Maya.
Cool. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, David. This is you came to all three meetings.
Yep, we made it.
Thank
you, I appreciate it.
Great. I did record this, and I'm just going to hang it on our website. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to send a follow-up to all the people who asked for an invitation and didn't tune in, just in case you missed it. So, all right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to sign off. I think it's dinner time, and there's a big debate tonight. So,
that's what we're here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.